Hey, it's Kamori, and welcome to part 2 of the Maid Futaba Sakura cosplay tutorial. So I'm still going to be using the CosThrough Maid Cafe pattern. It is number 23, and we're going to be making the apron portion. So to make it look a bit more like the Persona 5 designs, I'm going to be making the top out of red and the skirt out of white, and I'm going to be changing the shape so that it's more of a curved apron instead of a apron skirt. We're going to start by taking the waist tie pattern piece and cut 4 of them out of white fabric. And on 2 of the pieces, I'm going to add some fusible interfacing to give them a little bit more structure. Then we're going to put right sides together, and we're going to sew one of the interface pieces to one of the non-interfaced pieces, all along the side, leaving the end open. Turn the apron ties right side out and press them flat. Then we're going to cut out the base apron shape. I used the apron skirt pattern from the pattern and then just cut it so that it was a curve instead of more skirt-like. Futaba's apron has pockets, so I cut 2 pocket pieces out of some white fabric. I just made a pattern for it since there are no pockets on the CosThrough pattern. Then I added some interfacing to the back of it. Then we're going to fold down the top of the pocket and also press in the sides so that it looks like this. Position the pockets onto the apron and sew them into place along the sides, leaving the top open so that you can use them as a pocket. Now we're going to make the ruffle around the edge of the apron. So we're going to start by cutting a rectangle out of the white fabric. Then we're going to fold it in half and sew it together along the side using a loose stitch so that we can gather it later on. Putting right sides together, sew the ruffle onto the apron. I also added a little bit of zigzag stitch to keep it from fraying anymore. Then fold it back down and top stitch along the edge. Before we switch out the white thread in the machine, go ahead and take the center piece, and we're going to cut 3 pieces of white bias tape and sew them in place to act as the decoration on the front of her bodice. Then sew the side bodice pieces onto either side of the center bodice piece. Then sew the front bodice piece to the back bodice piece along the shoulder seams. Now it's time to make the ruffles on the top of the sleeves. So we're going to start by cutting 4 pieces out of red fabric. Then take 2 of the pieces, put right sides together, and sew them together along the sides. Turn the ruffle piece right side out and press it flat. Putting right sides together, gather the ruff onto the shoulder of the bodice. The material that I used for the maid costume ended up being a bit thin, so I decided to line it to give it a little bit more structure. So I cut a lining just by cutting out the pieces the same as we used for the front of the bodice. Then we're going to put right sides together and sew them together from on either side of the armholes. Then we're also going to sew them together from the back up along the top of the front of the bodice and along towards the back. Turn the apron bodice piece right side out and top stitch along the edges where we had sewn it together. Next we're going to take our apron ties from earlier, pleat the end and sew it onto the side of the apron on each side. Then, putting right sides together, sew the front and back bodice pieces together along the side with the apron tie sandwiched in between. The pattern instructions called for sewing some buttons onto the back of the apron to close it, but I personally prefer snaps, so I sewed some snaps on. And I also sewed some buttons onto the front of the design on either side of the bias tape that we had sewn on earlier. Putting right sides together, sew the apron onto the front of the apron bodice. Top stitch along the apron to keep everything in place, I also added a bit of zigzag stitching to keep the edges from fraying before top stitching. But with that, Futaba's apron is done. And here's what it looks like on the other side with the bow. For more cosplay sewing tutorial videos, please subscribe, and thank you very much for watching!